I have been focused, my role in the survivability project has really been to focus on pre-weaning mortality. And I really appreciated Dr. Coleman's talk yesterday about the being a believer or sort of a pessimist. And so those who know me know that I'm actually usually really excited and very passionate, and I'm definitely a believer in saving piglets. And so I've had moments over the past few years where I get a little down and I think, gosh, how are we going to do this and what are we going to do? So I'm excited for our conversations here for the next hour or so to reinvigorate all of us to get back to being believers and figure out some of the better ideas and the next steps forward. So I've been trying to put some data together recently to think about pre-weaning mortality, so this probably isn't surprising to anybody in the room, and we've seen it multiple times throughout the 2 days here, but pre-weaning mortality is going up. So I have the US in the black and Canada in the green. All of this data is just from PigChamp, and then the total born per litter on the right. And I started thinking, boy, the slopes of those lines look really similar to me. So when you actually create the formula on the trend line, sure enough, the slopes of those lines are quite similar. So if you think about it on a 100 pig basis, if you compare 2010 and 2020, if you made 100 piglets in 2010 and compared that mortality rate when we had only a 12% mortality rate compared to the average 15% mortality rate in 2020, in theory, we're losing them a little faster than we're making them. So that is a downer, sorry. We're gonna stay positive. So I thought we have a lot of work to do, and the reason we're all here is because I think we know that this probably isn't acceptable. So I wanted to think about really which piglets are dying. So I compared some data that we have recently from some other data from Dr. Ellis's lab at Illinois that has also come out recently, just to look at the birth weight categories and which piglets are dying within the different birth weight categories. So most of us could probably agree that piglets that are less than 1 kilogram at birth, there's a portion of those that probably really don't have any chance of survival. They are so small, they suffer from intrauterine growth retardation, and they are likely in need of euthanasia at birth. Some of those piglets, however, we know can be saved, and we need to know how to manage them to improve their survivability. In the literature, we call medium weight piglets everything from 1 to 1.5 kilo. We can argue later about breaking that down a little further because that's a pretty big weight range to call medium, but bear with me here. And then greater than 1.5s are sort of our heavyweights. And if you look at the two data sets, they both have lots of piglets in them, but if you notice in the light birth weight piglets, the pre-weaning mortality within that birth weight category is very high. That's what we expect. And then if you look at the medium weights, you go from 36 to 13% or 44 to 16% mortality in that birth weight category. But there's a heck of a lot more piglets born in that medium weight category than there are in that extreme lightweight category. So if you look at this on how it impacts overall mortality as a percent of total mortality, you see that they turn out to be about equal. So 35 and 41 or 30 and 44. So 70% of our mortality is coming from those two body weight classes. We've already seen earlier, the majority of that is coming from crushing within the first 3 days of life. So where do the light birth weight piglets come from? And we can say light, and maybe some of those mediums weights as well could maybe be considered light birth weight. So this is that same data set of mine from the mash-offs looking at how birth weight and litter size correlate with each other. So as litter size increases, we see an increase in the number of light birth weight piglets, and we see an increase in variation in birth weight within the litters. So those series of dots gets bigger as litter size goes up. So you kind of have two things going on there, and maybe they are related, probably, but maybe we should also think about them independently. How is it just straight birth weight that is impacting mortality, or is it variation in birth weight within the litter that actually starts to impact mortality? So we do know that litters that have light birth weight piglets in them have a lower survival rate. Most of that is coming from the light birth weight piglets being part of that litter. But again, I'm not sure that just body weight alone tells the entire story. So this is some data that shows that as with the different body weight categories and looking at the variation in birth weight within that litter, you can see that even the heavyweights, the 1.5 kilos and above, their survivability goes down when they're in a litter that has lots of variation in birth weight within the litter. So again, I'm not sure body weight alone tells our whole story. We have differences in the variation as well. So it's usually clear to me that within a litter, the light birth weight piglets have a lower chance of survival. But among litters, the relationship isn't always as clear because it may have to do with the variation and behaviors around nursing and access to milk as well. So I love this complicated thing that you probably can't read from the back of the room, but this was published by Baxter and Edwards showing kind of all of the things that contribute to pre-weaning mortality and crushing in piglets. So it sort of starts with sows basically producing very large numbers of piglets, and they're relatively underdeveloped. And we can see that with the intrauterine growth retardation, the very, very small piglets, but even piglets compared to other mammals are sometimes born actually relatively underdeveloped to other mammals. So these large litter sizes kind of fill in here and start to contribute to a million things that end up leading to basically, crushing and death. And so I've tried to study this chart because I think there's a lot of stuff on it. And I tried to break it down in several ways about what are our opportunities here for genetic selection to have impacts in this complicated cascade of events. And I'm a reproductive physiologist, so I can blame nutritionists and geneticists for everything on this table if I want to. So we'll start with the geneticists. Okay, so a few things on here that I think, and I'm also going to present it as a person who doesn't study heritability of anything for a living. So I'm going to assume that most things on here could be selected for if we measure them. So things like placental quality, vascularization. There is some data in sheep that suggests that we can actually improve vascularization of placentation and the development of the placenta. Not as much has been studied in that area in pigs, but obviously we have sows who produce 23 piglets of all good size. They must have a pretty darn good placenta and lots of blood flow going to it. In theory, we could start to try to select for things like that. The low birth weight and low viability piglets, adding viability, not just body weight to the model. Maybe there's a lot more opportunity to start looking at survival to certain days in the genetic models and selecting harder for livability versus just body weight. Maternal effects. I think there's a lot to learn here on maternal effects in terms of parity and body condition and their ability to metabolize energy and different things differently. If you were in this room in the morning session, there was definitely some discussions about body condition, and I think that's another thing we can think about in genetic selection. Stress. So I've been studying heat stress a lot in the male more than the female, but I do feel like we have some weenies that we've selected for. And I can say this because I work with boars, but there's a lot of boars lately that we kind of look at funny and they just seem to fall over dead. And we don't have animals that are very robust in handling stress today. They're good at growing fast, they're good at doing a lot of things, and actually our sows are really amazing milkers who are producing more milk per body weight, per kilogram of body weight than dairy cows are. So we have really good things happening, but when it comes to stress, we don't have a lot of animals that tolerate stress well. And my personal belief, I'm trying to keep my biases out of this, but I never do a good job at that. My personal belief is that when you look at crushing, the sows that lay down and stay calm no matter what happens have a lower crushing rate than those that are stressed by people coming in and picking up their piglets and getting in and out of their crate and walking the barn every day. Those of you that are in the barn know those sows that every time you even come near them, they jump up and they bark at you. And every time they get up, they have a likelihood of crushing something on their way down. And so is there a way to start selecting for better, lower stress, better maternal behaviors, sows that relax more and stay down more. And I have been told that that heritability is something really good, like 0.08. So I'm fully aware these aren't easy things to change, but I'm just trying to start thinking of what other things we can do for opportunities. So management. Where does management have opportunities in here? So farrowing kinetics. We've talked a lot today even about prolonged farrowing and how do we get those farrowing durations down. And in all of our induction studies, similar to Kia's work, we had a very low farrowing duration because we were staffed almost 24 hours a day and we were assisting every sow the minute they needed it. And if they went more than 40 minutes without having a piglet, we were sleeving them and pulling pigs. So we also had about that 4-hour average farrowing duration. So management can improve that. Assistants and people in the barn can improve that. I don't know how to help the piglets born later in the birth order, but we do know that those piglets born later have a lower chance of survival, much lower colostrum intake, and just aren't as lucky as the others. The ambient temperature, there's been a lot of discussions about this lately, and if you've looked at Mike Ellis's data recently from drying piglets was very effective at warming piglets up, but it really only impacted survival in low birth weight piglets when the barn was colder. Colder was 25 Celsius. It's not actually that cold, but I think we need to really start looking at the optimization of the temperature in the crate. So metal floors are cold, and sometimes the pit will circulate cold air around the barn more too. So while we think that the barn temperature settings on the heaters and things are set to the right temperature, what is the true temperature that those piglets and sows are actually experiencing? And I think we need to think about, comfort for the sow and comfort for the piglet. The piglet definitely needs to be warm, but are our barns really as warm as we think they are at the piglet level? Other things that impact colostrum intake. It's pretty clear, and if you ever followed Jeff Fillet's work from several years ago, it's pretty clear that reduced colostrum intake sets a developmental trajectory for that piglet to not grow or develop as well as the piglets that get high colostrum intake. So any management thing we can do to improve colostrum intake is going to be beneficial to that piglet. What else did I have? Oh, maternal effects also. I think we definitely have the opportunity to work with parity. Body weight and things like that are also going to be greatly impacted by management decisions that can start to impact mortality of the piglets. So this is the one slide I show every single time I present because it's my happy, this is where we have an opportunity. So this is some work by Dr. Bartolozzo, and I love this graph. So he graphed piglet birth weight versus colostrum intake. So I think this was published in 2013, and in 2013, the kind of amount of colostrum that we thought was needed for survival was about 200 grams for each piglet. I would argue today it's probably closer to 300 grams for survival, but the words survive and thrive are two different words. So to get them to survive, they probably need 300 grams of colostrum. To get them to thrive and grow with the same average daily gain as the big piglets who are drinking a lot of colostrum, they probably need to get at least 350 grams of colostrum in the first 24 hours to be in the thrive category. But what they looked at here is within the box, so calling birth weight, kind of low birth weight being 1.3 kilos and below, and that 200 gram of colostrum mark, if you look within that box, piglet mortality was about 31%. Everywhere else outside of that box was a mortality rate of about 4%. So not surprising, those light birth weight piglets who don't drink enough colostrum are dying. Here's where I get excited. Light birth weight piglets that drink a lot of colostrum, they have the same mortality rate as those big piglets who drink varying amounts and usually more colostrum. So we have an opportunity here to figure out how to get those lighter birth weight piglets to drink more colostrum, and we can reduce their mortality. So there's two ways to do that. The sow's got to produce more, or the piglet has to drink more. So I was trying to think through what things affect colostrum production in the sow. So we know that Parity 2 and 3 sows have higher colostrum production than P1s or older parity sows. We know that genotype affects it, but we don't know in modern day animals how much genotype really impacts colostrum production. So most of this data was done where we're trying to compare Michons to large whites and things like that. So there's got to be an effect of genotype, and the dairy industry has started using some functional candidate gene approaches and been very successful in selecting for colostrum production. We know that the teats at the front are way better than the teats at the back. So frontal teats produce more colostrum and more milk and support piglets better. The endocrine status of the sow can greatly change her colostrum production. So remember, colostrum is sort of present at the time of farrowing. So those last 2 weeks of gestation is when she's producing colostrum, and she's going to have it ready for the piglets right before farrowing. We all know that. It squirts us accidentally once in a while. And so her endocrine status around that transition to farrowing, colostrum is positively correlated with prolactin and negatively correlated with progesterone levels before farrowing. Our data is not the first data to show that farrowing induction can sort of change colostrogenesis. So there's even some data dating back to the early 90s that shows the same thing, that sometimes farrowing induction and use of those hormones ends colostrogenesis early and transitions them to whole milk production a little earlier. Late gestation diet, lots of research in this area, and I'm not a nutritionist, so this is by no means some complete literature review in the area, but definitely a relationship between energy status and colostrum production is not very clear. Altering dietary fat, we've already seen that, is quick to alter colostral fat, so if you change the fat in the sow's diet, fat is very susceptible to the change in the colostrum. But what are the impacts of those changes in fat aren't very clear for the piglet. There has been some data that shows that yeast and some other fermented products being fed to the sows can increase the immunoglobulin concentrations in colostrum, so a little better immune protection for the piglets. And vitamins and minerals are also going to be really important to kind of impact colostrum levels. Little data out there on auditory clues from the sows as well as stress. So most of the time we don't think that colostrum production is stimulated by the piglet. It's really produced before the piglets are even born, and it's not correlated with litter size. So for every additional piglet born in the litter, as litter size goes up by one piglet, every piglet in the litter drinks 22 to 42 grams less of colostrum. So we're taking the same amount of colostrum and dividing it by more piglets as we increase our litter sizes. We haven't really seen any data that shows that we're increasing colostrum production as we're increasing our litter sizes. So geneticists have work to do there. Okay, how do I get the piglets to drink more would be the other side of it. So nursing behaviors and some of that, litter characteristics and fighting around the udder, and then looking at that birth order thing. So I think those are some areas for research and investigation to happen. We've recently done a study looking at ways to try to stimulate piglets to go drink milk faster. So in dairy cattle, if you give a calf a little dose of lactose, something sweet on their tongue, they go and they start to have a suckling stimulus faster, and they'll go drink out of a bottle easier and faster. So we tried that in piglets. We used sow colostrum, just a little pump, about 4 milliliters is all they got, or evaporated milk, something sweet we could buy at the grocery store. And we didn't see any differences in the time to nursing and time to first suckle or their colostrum intake, so we weren't successful in stimulating nursing behaviors. But there could be 100 other ideas for some of those things. But what do piglets that survive really look like? So this is a table looking at 24 hours of age, mortality, piglets that died between days 1 to 3 or after day 3, or that were alive at weaning. What is the difference in just those piglets at 24 hours of age? So at 24 hours of age, the piglets that are going to live are going to have drank more colostrum, had a positive and pretty significant weight gain in the first 24 hours, and they've already regulated their body temperature and warmed up by 24 hours. So we could also say this is a way to identify at-risk piglets, those that would have had low colostrum intake, weight loss in the first 24 hours, and still have a low body temperature. And in quite a few of our studies at Purdue, that body temperature at 24 hours has been consistently low in our piglets that die or that have drank low colostrum. In one of our studies, we actually tried to create a low colostrum model, so we bottle fed set levels of colostrum for the first 24 hours, and those piglets that were on our low colostrum model, they only got about 175 milliliters of colostrum in the first 24 hours. They were still very cold at 24 hours. So rectal temperature at 24 hours is a good indicator of survival problems on the way. So how do we get those piglets to drink more? And this is where I've been doing a lot of chatting with commercial producers. So I struggle a little bit with the accessibility to data that we have in academia. So I only can have access to what is published in the literature, which, as most of you in this room know, is not a lot of the good production data that the big systems are creating on their own. So there's been lots of data recently in drying piglets and split suckling, using different strategic cross-fostering methods to maybe put light birth weight piglets together. Some data on supplementation, so 15 to 20 milliliters of colostrum being tube-fed, as well as different piglet nursing stimulation. However, most of the data that's published is in low numbers of animals, low numbers of litters, or it's also have some that negatively impact some piglets while helping others. So for example, split suckling for 3 days straight really reduced overall pre-weaning weight gain in your heavy pigs, but advantaged your light birth weight piglets. So how much are we willing to take away from gain and growth in our heavyweights to make sure we bring up our lightweights to kind of even it out? And then some of these are very unrealistic to perform in commercial settings. This is me on Thanksgiving Day, bottle feeding 2 piglets at one time. I was very proud of myself for being able to get 2 done at a time. And obviously probably not going to happen in a commercial setting to get them a little extra colostrum. Actually, one of the studies I really wanted to do for this project was to milk sows and directly administer colostrum to light birth weight piglets. And the big systems told me, Kara, drop it. No way in hell am I milking sows. Fine. So it took me a while to be convinced of that because I milk sows all the time and I don't think it's that hard. But fine, you're not going to milk sows, so we'll come up with something else to look at for now. However, in conversations I've been having with a lot of the larger systems who've done a lot of the research in these areas, there's some anecdotal things I hear. I hear stories of, we started a split suckling thing and our mortality dropped 2 or 3%. And then when you have some of the systems who do a more controlled trial with some of these management practices, they don't get it. They don't get the increase in survivability. So I'm not as good of a storyteller as Jason Ross, but when I first started at Purdue, I went to Wayne Singleton and I said, I really want to see the data about why we rock semen samples every day. I can't find it. I've been through all these old things. Like, can you show me that data? And he laughed and he said, I'm not really sure we have that data. But who was going to go to the semen cooler every day and check the temperature of the semen if we didn't give them a job to do at the semen cooler every day? So I think about that story when I think about the farms that show a good improvement in mortality from putting in one of these management practices. Perhaps we're putting people in the barn that are paying attention. We're putting people next to that sow that maybe when they're drying the piglets, they're also grabbing the sow's piglet next door that's just about to get crushed, and they're hearing the screaming piglets and getting them out in time to save them. And they're noticing that a sow hasn't farrowed and hasn't popped out a pig in a good amount of time, and they're providing more assistance. So if you followed, I don't think I put it in here, but if you followed, like the recent data out of Mike Ellis's lab on a commercial farm looking at the drying of piglets, for example, there were 10,000 piglets in the study. It was very robust. And drying piglets had no impact on colostrum intake or mortality unless the barn was cold and the piglets were very lightweight. So I think we have to share some information because my role in this project is to ask the next best question for us to go after. But the data that we have access to here in academia is sort of limited by what's published, and in all of this published data, there is almost never an impact of any of these practices on colostrum intake or survival. You will see some that impact average daily gain and growth rates, but almost all the papers I've read have never shown an impact of any of these management practices on survival. However, you have to have probably 5,000 piglets per treatment to see statistics, to power your study, to see differences in mortality, which most of them are not. So I think hopefully this kind of leads us to a point where we can revisit this chart together and start some discussions in this room about what are your successes, what have you found that worked, what has not worked, and where do you think we need to focus and keep looking. So I'll open it up to all of us to start discussing. Thank you.